just record on this computer and you guys can. Cool. So yes, use effect. Yeah, it's recording. So some common hooks are use state, use effect. Oh, whoops, because I am, there we go. There we go, all right. Use ref, use context. Any other ones? These are the bread and butter. If you know these four and you're comfortable with them, then you're pretty set. There's a few other obscure ones like use callback and use memo. We won't talk about those today. We may not even really talk too much about these either because we're going to be talking about custom hooks, which once we talk about custom hooks, it'll actually help inform how these guys work. Use state, use effect, etc. Cool. All right. So the first rule of hooks is they must be called at the top level. What does that actually mean? So if we look at the docs, it says only call hooks at the top level. What does that mean? Say what? So how does that relate to, so let me ask the question in terms of where does a hook always get called inside of a component?
Okay, I got it. So we have our function,
okay,
and then we have like functions and inside the function and loops and stuff inside the functions, and those would be like lower level because they're deeper inside it.
Okay.
So we'd only call it at like the top. So you wouldn't call it, you call it inside a function, but you wouldn't call it inside a function inside a function.
So yes, you're on the right track. What it means though in terms of a component is it means that it has to be in the outermost scope of a React component. That's what it means to be at the top level. So this would be top level, anywhere in here. Now, if I have some sort of nested lower level block, someone's chatting me. Oh, can you, my screen is, it says it's sharing this window.
I see this problem recently. I wonder if like stopping the screen share and starting again.
Yeah, let me try. Let's see here. There's desktop one and desktop. I think this is, yeah, this is that better, Tirza? Can you see?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, cool. All right, so basically anywhere here I can call a hook. So let's say I have some random, use random hook. I've got some hook that I can call. Okay, great. That would, if that actually existed, if that was defined, I could call it there. Okay, awesome. Now, what if I have something like this? Whoa, this computer's chirping out. Dude, I'm not even touching it. Wait, there we go. Okay, I don't know.
Plug it in. Might be dying.
Oh, the keyboard?
Yeah.
That's convenient. Oh, that's not.
That might be my other.
Nope, that's a different one.
Another over there.
There it is. Okay. That was crazy. Okay, so that block, top level stuff. Okay, great. Now what if I have an if statement and I've got a hook here? Would this work? No. because it's not in the top level. So top level, they're just talking about the hierarchy of code blocks, or in other words, scope. So you can only call a hook in the outermost scope of a React component. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions about that? And honestly, that's the most important rule with hooks. Frankly, there's nothing. There's the other stuff.
So why do we have that rule?
So why? That's a great question. It's like, okay, so we know that we can only call hooks at the top level, but what is that, like, why? Well, it has to do with the way that hooks manage state. So suppose we have a React app and we have this hierarchy where you have your app, right? And then it goes down a level to like your, you have a, I don't know, we'll call it like a header. And then you have up here, you've got a footer. And you've got this tree that branches down further and further and further. You've got a body, etc. In order to make sure that those, every time a hook is called, it has to be called in a certain order. So if I have a hook being called in the app and I have a hook being called in the header and I have a hook being called in the footer, well, remember how state works. It's React keeps track of state changes. So in order for one state to change to a new state, there has to be a clear protocol for how to go from one state to another. And since hooks are an integral part of that, they have to be called in a predictable order. So by having them on the top level of a React component, there is a predictable pattern of state changes. Does that make sense? So it's all about predictability. Because if I have if statements that are calling hooks only conditionally, then React has a very, very difficult time trying to figure out, well, what did the state look like previously? Because otherwise you'll get this situation. You'll see this error here. Let me show you if I can, hopefully I can reproduce this error. So suppose I have some count. Okay, so I'm gonna say const, I'm gonna do, I don't know, count and then set count. Okay, and we'll set it at 0. Okay, so then we'll just make a little tag and we'll have our count like that. Just a little easier to read. Okay, and then we'll put a little button here. And then we'll, I don't know, do this, and then we'll have a little click listener here. Okay, so I'll just say set count, open that. And we'll set count to count plus 1. All right, this is probably one of the first things you learn with state. All right, I'll go here, click, is equal to. All right. Sweet. So when I click, okay, great. So with every time that I click this, if you go back to the very basics of React, clicking the button triggers a state change, which triggers a re-render, which gives me a new display, a new view with the updated state taken into account. Every time I click, it triggers that new render cycle. However, if I were to only do this under a certain condition, if I were to like somehow, let's say that let's say I try to mess around with this and I say, okay, well, oops. I don't know why this is not indenting automatically. It's driving me crazy. Oh my gosh. It's doing the thing again. Okay. All right, so if our count is, I don't know, we'll say like is equal to 10, we're gonna then try to, we're gonna screw around with React a little bit. We're gonna say, I don't know, hidden count and set hidden count equal to React.useState. We're gonna say, I don't know, 100. So here is that error. UseState is called conditionally. React hooks must be called in the exact same order in every component right there. So whenever you see that error, that tells you that, oh crap, I didn't render or I didn't call the hook at the top level. Which means that the very first render cycle, it would mean that it wouldn't even know anything about this. And only until the 10th render cycle, after I've clicked that button a bunch of times, would this value have any meaning? But then it wouldn't know what the previous state was because this was never instantiated with the original, when the original component rendered. So that's why you have to have hooks called on the top level. All right, let's get rid of that. Okay, so how many of you have made your own hooks before? So it's a lot easier than you think. Because let's think about what a hook actually is. It's just a function, right? So useState, we're gonna do a little fake mock-up of what useState actually is. So it's like, all right, so mock useState, it's a function. Okay, cool. All right, awesome, easy. It's just a function, cool. And it takes some initial value, whatever that may be. And then it does some internal magic using the React library, right? Okay, but what does it output? What does useState specifically? Close? What data structure does it return?
It's an array with a variable.
It's an array. It's an array of two things. It's also called a, they call those, there's a word for it, doesn't matter, it's a computer sciencey word. So yes, you're right, it returns an array. What does the first value represent? We know that there are two values, so what's the first one? Yeah. If there is one, right? Otherwise it's just undefined. Okay, what's the second one?
A function that changes the value.
Yeah, it's a function that lets you set the new state with whatever value you provide, right? So that means that there's some fancy, we'll call it a setter function that's in here that takes some new value, right? And so again, I'm pseudocoding. This isn't the actual thing, but here's our state value. Let's call it current state value, which is, of course, initial value to begin with, right? And then our new value, I'm going to change this to let so that it would let us change it. So then it's going to say current state value is equal to new value, right? So we're actually not returning the initial value. What are we returning? Yeah, the current state value. As well as what? The setter. Boom. That's essentially what the useState function does. Now, obviously, it's more integrated with the whole React fancy stuff. But in principle, it's very simple. You have a value, you have some state, or you have some value that is changing constantly, and you output an array with the value and a setter. Boom, easy. So when you're writing a custom hook, though, you already have access to useState. So one of the cool things about hooks is that you can invoke other hooks. That's why they're so useful. That's why they're so composable, because you can write a hook that invokes other hooks, and those hooks might invoke other hooks, and those hooks can call hooks, so you can just have hooks for days. But ultimately, all you're doing is you're just managing state, and you're packaging it up in a nice, easy to interface way. So, does anybody have any questions about this before we make our own custom hook? All right. So let me comment this guy out. All right, so one of the most simple functionalities or logical operations that is used in most apps are some sort of toggler, right? There's also what other like discrete functionalities have you guys used in your apps? So, for example, with a toggle, with a toggle functionality, it's just a bit of logic that lets you set a value to true or false. Where does that happen a lot? Where is that useful in an app?
If you want to like reuse.
Okay, actually,
something.
I think I might have something.
So sorry, can you explain that a little more?
Yeah, well, if you have a toggler function, it's set to false. So you have like a sign up form.
Okay.
Thing,
Okay.
and then you have underneath it like I'm already a member. So you click that and it changes the sign up form to login.
Yeah.
It's the same form, or I mean, yeah. That's it.
Right, exactly. You can have a situation where you, anytime you need to go back and forth between something, opening and closing a modal perhaps, or opening and closing a menu, there's 1,000 different use cases for having some sort of toggler, right? Something's either on or off, or true or false, or red or blue, stuff like that. And what do you have to add?
Okay, so sometimes something I'll do is I'll create like an interceptor for like the set count function.
Okay.
So I'll change set count to underscore set count.
Okay.
And then I would find a new function which is set count that then later calls underscore set count, which is then useful because then I can have a piece of code run every time the set count function is called. Does that make sense?
Sort of. So you're saying that you have set count here,
Yeah.
but you define that
As underscore.
underscore set count. Okay.
And then underneath that, I would go the next line.
Okay.
You go const set count. And then you go equal args fat arrow function. So you actually have to type args in the parentheses.
Say what?
You type args inside the parentheses.
Okay.
And then in the fat arrow, you would call underscore set count with args.
Okay.
And then this would basically let me run some other code that is like related to the change of state, but like this then allows me to, every time something calls set count, I can have some other code run that's not set in the state, that's like related.
So like you're saying you'd
So
put it
let's
in
say I
here
run the console.log in args every time the state was changed. Yeah,
like that.
makes sense.
Mhm.
Could we like create a hook to do this?
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep.
That was my idea.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is we're gonna use the toggle example to show how we can compartmentalize discrete logical functionality. So what I mean by discrete logical functionalities is just some sort of useful feature that we can just like call on when we need to, instead of having to. It would be the difference between let's think about a car. If I need to go somewhere far away, I don't build a car every time that I need it, right? I just have it. It's there. I can get in my car, I turn the key and I drive, right? I don't construct a new car every single time I need to go somewhere. That would be ridiculous. So a car is this discrete bit of transportation functionality that I just have access to. It's been built once so that I can use it over and over again. So hooks are really similar to that. So we can build the car once, we can build the hook once, and then we can just reuse that hook over and over again whenever we need to use its bit of functionality. So with a toggler, let's figure out how we might write this if all we have is use state. How might we use a toggler? How might we write it? I need to have a button that says on and off. How might we do it?
Const, say like boolean value or something.
Okay.
Whatever you want to call it.
Like on?
Sure.
Okay.
And then set on
Okay.
equals use state
Okay.
and true or false.
Okay.
And then so you do a function where you would set on to true, I guess. So yeah, function. Yes.
Okay. What does it do?
Set on. It takes previous value.
Okay. Which is on.
And then fat arrow, or yeah.
Okay. So it just toggles, it switches it back and forth.
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Makes sense. Okay. So I want to have a button that says on or off. And when I click it, it switches. How would I implement that here?
So you have like the on click, you call toggle.
Okay.
Button.
Awesome.
And then you can do a ternary. It says on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Let's just for the sake of making this area look clean, let's just make a label that says on. On. I was like, and then we'll just put our label here. Make sense? All right. There we go. Okay. Okay, let's see what happens. Hey, that's awesome. Okay, well, what's the problem with this?
It's pretty specific.
Yeah, it's really specific. I'm now, let's say I have another button that I want to have the same thing, but I want it to be completely independent from this value. I want it to have the same exact functionality, but I want it to be independent.
Each, can you make another function that's not toggle
So-
or something?
Yeah, so I could just rewrite the logic, right? I could say other on and then set other on. Okay, cool. And then I can I can duplicate all this. You see where I'm going with this, right? This is awful. I'm dying a slow death right now. And then we got this guy. We've got our other label. Oh, this is just, oh man. Okay. All right, that wasn't so bad. Like this is totally fine. Everything's fine. Everything's fine right now. Okay, and we got that. Then we've got our other label. Okay. So we just basically doubled the amount of code. So the amount of code that we're writing per operation is staying right in line. So, okay, let's see if it works. Hey, okay, cool. So, oh, wait. Oh,
You didn't set other on line 25.
thank you.
Mhm.
This is why you're here, Eric.
Happy to help.
Hey, okay, cool. So they're independent. Okay, well that's neat. Okay, well, now of course, what if I needed 10 of these? Well, I would now have 100 lines of code that are all doing the same damn thing. So how might we condense this so that the logic only exists in one spot, but the implementation exists in all the places that we need to?
So you wrap it in a function
Okay.
that returns on and returns toggle.
Ah, there we go. So we're gonna call this. So remember, with a custom hook, you have to call it use something. That's just the convention. So let's call it use toggler. Okay. Now, sometimes it might be helpful to let us have our initial value. Or let's call it default 2. Okay, and then like you said, we can say, okay, let's now invoke our use state. So look, I'm just copy and pasting this. Look how easy this is. Doop. And I'll just change our initial value to here. Okay, cool. And now what I can do, so you said that I was going to return on and toggle, right?
Yes.
How should I do that?
In an array,
In an array. Okay. Why an array?
because that's just the convention.
So besides the convention, what's a good reason for it?
It's easy to destructure.
Yeah, exactly. Because just like in use state, I can call this whatever I want. I can call that like open or on or yes or no. You know, I can give it whatever semantic name I want that represents that value. Cool. So internally, we're just going to call it on and set on. That works. I only have to worry about this logic once. So let's now implement this. So by putting the logic all here, I can now get rid of all of this crap. And now I'm just left with the implementation. So how am I going to use this? Yeah, sure. So let's call, for the first button, let's say we're representing some sort of like, I don't know, menu option or something. So it's either open or closed. Okay, so we can call this open to represent open. And now we can do set open, right? And now we can say use toggler. And now I can pass in whatever value I want. Let's say I want this to be true at first. Okay, great. Okay, what about the second one? Let's say this button is representing the status of something. It's either complete or pending. What do we do?
Complete or status, not status.
Yeah, status. Or let's do complete and set complete or set status or something. Yeah, and then this one, let's say it's false, right? So now our labels can be a little bit, now we can just use these semantically. So I'm going to say, okay, well, my label is now open, and this will say it's now open or it's closed. This one is going to say complete or it's pending. Whoa. Typing too fast for this keyboard, apparently. All right, and then I just need to change my value here. And then now I know it doesn't really look like we saved that much code, but what we did is we don't have to care about the nuts and bolts of the functionality. We can now just worry about, we have this toggler and we have the value of the status of that particular toggle. So now when I go back over here, open, closed, pending, complete, pending, complete. Okay, okay, cool. That's pretty awesome. Any questions so far? So what time
So you
is it?
built it once and then you use it.
Mm-hmm. What other discrete functionalities can you guys think of? Something that you do all the time?
Saving like an array of data.
Saving an array of data, like in what kind of situation? Say what?
Yeah, I mean my book database app.
Okay.
Saving different books.
Okay.
So it'll save the object of that book in an array.
Mm-hmm.
You save.
Yeah, that's a great example. So what are the kinds of things that what kind of operations do you do on that array?
I'll delete one of the books.
Okay.
Pretty much just delete
All the crud stuff, right?
Yeah, but the way that this could relate to what you're talking about is I have two different pages that save, like one is unread and one is read.
Okay.
So I save them in two different arrays because obviously it's two different things, but if you have like 10 of those or something, you write a custom book for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So So for our last example, let's show how we might abstract away some of these really basic array operations. So adding stuff to an array, removing stuff from an array, editing stuff. Let's worry about the first two, adding and deleting. Those are kind of the two most basic ones, okay? So let's get rid of these. Okay, so if I were to do this not using a hook, I would probably do something like this. Data, set, data. So, okay, cool. Or actually, no, let's call it books. Books. And then we'll say set books. And this is equal to react.useState. Okay, I'm going to initialize with an empty array. Okay, cool. Well, now I've got this situation where I can add. So this would just be set books. Here's our new book, for example, and it sets our books to whatever we had before, and then our new book. Cool. All right, and then we can do our remove, which we can do it by the ID that we want to remove, and we'll set our books to be, or we'll just filter out the ones that don't have that ID. So we're going to say, take this guy out, and we'll say ID, ID to remove. Okay, so that's kind of our interface. Okay, so if we were to kind of make this into a little bit of UI, what we'll do, so normally you probably want to, this would be a lot more involved. We'd probably have separate components to represent a single book, and there may be buttons and stuff, but we're not going to worry too much about that. This is just an example. So we're just going to map through our books, and we're going to render a book. All right, so we'll just say, this mouse just, oh my gosh. Okay. Come on. Nothing is working for me today. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. Okay, here's our, okay. Okay, sweet. Here's my div. And then, I don't know, we'll make a h3 tag. And we'll just say book.title. Okay, cool. And we'll put a button here for when we need to delete it. We'll worry about that in a minute. Okay, and then we will have a button for, I'm not going to do a whole form and stuff. We'll pretend that the book's already been created, and we'll just have a button that just adds it to the array. Nothing crazy. Okay, so we'll just have a plus button that will add a book. Okay. Okay, let's see what our interface looks like. Okay, super awesome. All right, so when I click on this book, it's going to add a new book. Okay, great. So I'm going to say on click, and I'm just going to make this book up right now. And we're going to say, we're going to add a book, and I'll just make it up. I don't know, what's a good book you guys like you've read recently?
How to stay sane.
How to Stay Sane. I haven't read it, but that sounds
I think
useful.
it's on the desk here.
Oh, it is. Nope, I'm missing a. Okay. Okay, cool. Beautiful. Hey. So there's all of our books. Okay, beautiful. All right, now removing is very similar. So when we click on this button right here, oh, and oops, I forgot to give it an ID. So let's do, to generate an ID,
Just install UUID real fast.
yeah, it's a good idea. I want to show you a really cool way of generating random integer IDs using a hook, but that'll take too much time. Work. Huh, that's not good. Okay, whatever. I'm just gonna use math.random for this example. All right. Cool. And then when we click on this ID, we will then just remove. Okay. All right. This is not the most, oh, whoa. I know exactly what I did wrong. Boom. All right. Hey. Oh no. Remove book.id. There we go. It's legal. That looks good. Oh my gosh, I know it. I know it just happened. All right, you know what? I'm going to show you something cool. Anybody know what a closure is?
Closure?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. What's a closure?
it's, you get a function, okay, you have a function, how do you explain this? So in JavaScript, if you have a function, return a function, you can set values in the inner function based on values in the outer function, and the return function will still have access to those values.
Exactly. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to use an ID. I'm going to use a closure to generate an ID. So I'm going to say ID plus plus. Here we go. Look at that. Now I've got our own little ID generator. Sweet. If you have any questions about this, ask me after this. What did I'm missing something. Oh, duh. I'll make an ID. Okay, cool. Click, that's right. Cool. Remove book.id. Awesome. Okay. And that's all good. All right. Boom. something is missing. Cool. Awesome. D, that looks good. Cool. That looks good. What is missing? Oh my gosh. No, that's right. This is why. I called that ID when I should have called it book so that I can say book to ID. Okay. There we go. Okay. We have a way of, so if you look in here, notice they're all cumulative, which is kind of cool. So we'll always get a unique ID every time. Even if we delete one, which is the really cool thing. Check it out. Now it's 678. Very cool. Okay. Now, so we have our fake little database. Now, if we wanted to, we could of course make this book have contain a lot more information, like, you know, what genre is it? Is it rented? You know, stuff like that. But we're going to keep this simple. But what is wrong with this implementation right now?
Not a hook.
Right.
Let's not try.
It's not a hook, but that's not, the problem isn't that it's not a hook. What's the problem? The hook is the solution to the problem, but what's the problem? Yeah, it's not very reusable. If I wanted to have, let's say I didn't care about books. What if I had other data? I don't care. As long as something has an ID, I want to be able to add, remove, and update things. And I want to have a way of interfacing with that. So what we're going to do is we're going to abstract this away into a hook. So we're going to say const, and I don't know, we'll call it a cache, or a use cache, sorry.
I like your terminology.
Thanks. So use cache, okay, well, here's our initial data, okay, in the form of an array. So if we have some data to populate it with, then we can do that, okay. Here's our data. Here is our set data, and we're going to use a hook with our initial data. And if we don't provide anything, we'll just make sure that it defaults to an empty array. Okay, cool. Well, now we can use the same set of functionalities that we had written over here. We'll just need to change them around just a tiny little bit, but nothing crazy, right? We're going to first of all not call this book, but we'll call it, I don't know, item, data item if you want. So we've got our item and then our data. And then we'll keep that, but instead of books, this obviously is going to be data. This will be our item, and then item.id. Okay, same exact functionality, right? So, boom, we're gonna get rid of that crap. Okay, now the question is, okay, well, what does this function return? What does this hook return? An array, well, it could, but does it have to?
So
It could also be an object. What would be more helpful?
an array, because then we can dynamically name everything easier.
Right, we could, and I could see an argument for that. I could definitely see an argument for that. But with something like this that we know is going to get bigger, you know, there could be add, remove. What about sort? What about filter? What if we added all of these functionalities to this interface? Well, then we'd have an array with potentially like 10 things that we'd have to name, which might be fine, but they all do the same thing. They're all adding, removing, updating, whatever. So
An array of objects.
that's overkill. So why did you say objects? Because you're right. I would argue for the object. But I'm wondering what your thought process is or what your justification is for that.
Well, I remember seeing an example It was an object. I think it was Bob's video.
Uh-huh.
Because it matters what. No, it doesn't matter what index you. I don't know.
So what I'm looking for is how we're going to be using this. We're going to be using this hook, and the problem with using an array is that now I may potentially have to rename up to 10 things, and then I have to remember which index. It's like, oh crap, was remove in index 5 or was it in index 3? With a duple, it's easy to remember. And with the triple, that's about as far as you'd want to go before reconsidering whether to use an object. The benefit of an object is that the names are now set in stone. So in this case, that would be a benefit. I would argue. Some people might argue differently, but I would make the case that returning an object with the names of the methods that they do makes more sense, in my opinion. So now we can say, okay, here's our data, and now we can say, then we could have add, and we could have remove. Does that make sense? Say what?
Are you putting an object?
So this way, this will make more sense when I actually use the hook here. So I'm going to call this my my cache, okay? And let's just for the hell of it, give it this same guy to start with. And just so this is a little bit easier to read. Do you see the benefit of that?
So you just plug in whatever data.
Yeah, so what do I need to change that to?
Cache.add.
Boom. See that? That makes sense? Yeah, what do I need to change that to?
Cache.data.
Boom. And the thing is that I could call this books, and then now it's books.data.map. Books.add. See that?
Everybody gets off.
The microphone is like picking up.
Right.
See what? Well, yeah, but it's coming through the speakers, not.
There's probably someone on Zoom.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay, let's see if this still works. Set books, what did I do wrong?
Oh,
Oh,
you have set books.
yep, there it is. That's the one last thing I needed to do. No, it's not defined. And then, oh, right here. So this would be books.remove. What do you think? Yeah, yeah, pretty cool, right? Oh yeah. So this alone right here, because now what's nice is that if you need some additional functionality or something, you can now compose this you can now compose this hook. Okay, so this is a very basic cache, right? So I'm gonna show you one last thing that you can do with this to kind of let you imagine all the amazing possibilities that there are out there now. So this lets you add and remove things, right? Okay, well, what other things might we want to be able to do? Update. Cool. Now, this is just going to be an example. You'd probably want to have add, remove, and update in the same interface, right? So we'd want to have a const update, right? And then we'd have our function update, and then that gives us all the CRUD methods, right? Awesome. Cool. I'll let you guys figure out how you might do that as an exercise, but there are some more advanced things that you might want to do that go beyond just basic CRUD stuff. What do you think that? Can you think of anything?
Search for similar items.
Yeah, what about a search? So I could put in a search here. I could put in all sorts of things. I could put a filter, a sort. I could do like a mass update, right? Where I'm not just updating a single thing, I'm updating 10 things or as many things as I want. But what I'm gonna do is that starts becoming a little bloated because I may wanna come up with different implementations depending on how I'm using this. But what's cool is that we can compose hooks in a really cool way. So suppose instead of adding more code here, how might I make a more advanced cache that implements the basic cache but gives me an interface with all the advanced cache features? How might I do that?
You make another hook.
Okay.
that calls the first hook.
Bam! Exactly. Hell yeah. Just go over here and you say advanced cache. What does it do? It takes a cache, an already instantiated cache, as an argument, and then you pass, and then it returns everything that's in the normal cache as well as other advanced features. Right? I could make a search now. I could say const search, and then whatever this function is, it's going to search through the cache and do stuff, you know, get you stuff. So then over here, so we can either provide a cache here, or we can say we could call this initial data, and then say, here's our base, I'm gonna call this basic cache, and use cache with our initial data. So here we are. And what's even cooler about this is that if I need, for whatever reason, if I needed to override one of these functions, I can simply define it here and then just override it there without ever touching the original hook. So now when I'm down in my app, I can either use a normal cache, and then, I don't know, we'll call this admin books, use advanced cache. And I could now pass in books here, books.data. Yeah.
I'm not sure if you did, but yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, I can feel the excitement just.
Yeah.
Oh no, this is good. This is
Isn't
good.
it dope?
This is cool, yeah.
It's dope. So hooks are the greatest thing ever. If anybody has any questions about what I did here, come ask me. I'll show you. Anyways, hope that was informative. I'll leave this up here and let them save it and whatnot. Online peeps, do you have any questions or concerns or whatever?
Can you post that on your Git or something?
Yeah, I'll have vSchool post this in like the general channel or whatever.
Okay, or a write up that
I'll
they do
like,
or something
push
like
up
that.
to GitHub and stuff.
Cool, thanks.
Yep. Yeah, that's all I got.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you use custom books like very often?
Dude, all the time. I've probably written like 100 custom hooks.
So do you use normal hooks outside of custom hooks anymore? Or is it just custom hooks?
If it's like something that's just extraordinarily basic, I'll just use state like right out in the open. But that's kind of rare because there's so much abstraction in our app that usually we're just, in most cases, I'm writing a custom hook to integrate with some other custom hook so that the UI, so that this side right here doesn't get all cluttered up. So like this is about as messy as it gets, or I try to anyways. So to answer your question, not very much.
Yeah. So do you keep most of like, so right here we have the custom hooks written in the React component. Would you usually write them in another file somewhere else?
Yeah, it just depends on like what you need. Usually my folder structure is something like I've got my main root component. Let's say I have some feature where I have to build some form that does stuff or something. Usually that form will be like, I'll have like an index.js, which is the root component. Then I'll have like a subfolder with subcomponents, and then like a lib file that has hooks. And if they start getting really crazy, then I'll break that down into like smaller files. Just kind of whatever, depends on the situation. 40 years. So I was a vSchool student once upon a time. I was a welder before that. Yeah.
So you build robots now.
Say what?
You build robots now.
Well, I haven't quite connected the two, but that would be cool. But yeah, I was a welder, and then I went to vSchool. Bob and Eric were my teachers. And then they hired me as a TA, and then I became a teacher, taught here for 2 years. And then I worked for a company called Timeshareware as a software engineer, and then I just barely got a job at Fidelity that I started on Tuesday.
So is that your first coding job outside of?
Timeshareware?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was my first like software engineer role. Yeah.
You excited for the new gig?
Yeah, I'm stoked. Yeah, it's like right by my house. Yeah. So it's a lot of work again.
So Fidelity Sense.
Yeah, it's just by the gateway.
That's
Yeah, they're the largest 401k provider in the US. Yeah. So, yeah. Say what?
pretty big deal then. They're important.
Yeah, they're a giant company. It's crazy. But yeah, I'm on LinkedIn and stuff, so you're welcome to if you have questions. I got so much out of coming here. I really miss teaching. I love teaching. So anytime I have like a day off or something, I like to just come hang out. So if you see me around and you have questions, feel free to hit me up. I like to help people out. And I gotta give back. So much has been given to me through vSchool that I like to just give back in whatever way I can. So, but yeah, it's a thing. You can it's no joke. You can go from doing whatever it was before
I took a risk, you know, it's kind of scary when you just decide one day, you know what, fuck it, I'm gonna do this thing. But it paid off, so, yeah.
Do you work with like other software engineers who like went to university instead? Like, how does that?
So they think they're better than that? No, my coworkers were fantastic. There was like no judgment whatsoever. They would help me with stuff that I didn't know something, they were happy to help. They would ask me questions too. I would help them because I helped train their team in React because they were changing from like some old system called like Microsoft Silverlight. They were transitioning into React. So I don't know anything about Silverlight at all. But they didn't know anything about React. So like we kind of were able to like, help each other out on that end. Then there were some backend guys there that like they were trained in like C and C++ and stuff. And like maybe I'm just lucky, but they were super help. They were willing to help always. But I think it's the case, and I think that's not the exception. I think most people are very willing to help out. And as long as you're like excited and willing to learn, if you're not willing to help that person that wants to learn, then you're just a dick.
Yeah.
So, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, what's the point of like judging somebody and looking down on somebody just because they didn't have the same experiences? But if they're willing to learn and want to know what you do, how to do it, and be better at it, I feel like it's kind of your responsibility in a way to like help them. And most people, I think, that I've encountered that are just awesome that way. Like, they love help. Most people like help. So it's good. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, there's some people that are just dicks and there's nothing you can do about it. But that's just how like it is.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Sam, can you figure some of the online people asked if you could push that to GitHub? We'll do stuff. Cool. Yeah. And am I still recording? Oh yeah.
I'm sure they appreciated
Yeah.
the job material.
Yeah. All right, online people, it is good to hear your voices and see your usernames. So have a good one.
Thanks, Ben.
See you later. You're welcome. I hope that was helpful. Hit me up if you guys have any questions.
Thanks, Ben.
Yep, you're welcome. See ya. All right, well, thanks, guys.
All right, so, take care, guys.
See you later.